we say first gas, accelerates the rise in the pulmonary artery of a concurrently administered gas with second gas. This is second gas effect. Because what is the mechanism? The mechanism is second gas effect can increases to kill inflow of all gases, and also concentrating effect on the second gas as a result of high volume uptake of the first gas. And the factors determine transfer of inhaled anesthetics from alveoli to arterial blood is blood gas partition coefficient, cardiac output, and alveolar to alveolar to venous partial pressure differences. This chart gives the blood gas partition coefficient of commonly used inhaled anesthetics, for example, isoflurane, sevoflurane, and desflurane. And from the chart, we can see the desflurane, the blood gas partition coefficient of desflurane is lowest. That means the speed of induction use desflurane is fastest. Yeah. And the factors determine transfer of inhaled anesthetics from arterial blood to brain is brain blood partition coefficient, cerebral blood flow, and alveolar to venous partial pressure differences. And here is the brain blood partition coefficient of common used inhaled anesthetics. Another very important concept is minimum alveolar concentration within MAC. Minimum alveolar concentration means minimum alveolar PI of inhaled anesthetics at 1 atmosphere that prevents skeletal movement in response to noxious stimuli, for example, surgical skin incision in 50% of patients. And MAC usually used to compare the potency of inhaled anesthetics. And the MAC usually we say MAC values are additives. And clinically, 1.3 MAC can prevent movements in nearly all surgical patients. Below is the MAC of common used inhaled anesthetics. From this chart, we can see the Holocene. The MAC of Holocene is the lowest. It means the potency of Holocene is largest. And about the mechanism of anesthesia, the mechanism of general anesthesia, nobody actually knows. There are many theories about the mechanism of general anesthesia, but now have no actual mechanism known by us. The maintenance of anesthesia, the muscle relaxant we commonly used, and neuromuscular relaxant. Usually we usually have two types. One is the rising neuromuscular blockade. This is succinylcholine, right? And the succinylcholine usually used the induction period of anesthesia. It is a very rapid onset, right? And non-depolarizing neuromuscular blockade. Usually, we use this kind of muscle relaxant to maintain the anesthesia. This is a common used muscle relaxants in clinic, and they are ED95 and onset, recovery time, and intubation dose, and renal regulation on the hepatic and degradation, and so on. And we can see intraoperative maintenance of anesthesia. When we take care of our patients, we should consider the fluid and the blood management. We say the common or say general guidelines of fluid and blood management is, and this is for patients without significant blood loss. Usually we admit isotonic electrolyte containing solutions, and we can administer normal saline, sometimes an LP or fluid, this kind of fluids, to replace short space loss based on the degree of surgical trauma. We say if the surgery is minimal, we usually use 3 to 4 milliliter solutions per kilogram per hour. And if the surgery is moderate, and usually 5 to 6 milliliter per kilogram per hour. And severe, or we say large surgery, is 7 to 8 milliliter per kilogram per hour. And we should know, replace 1 milliliter of blood loss, we should use 3 milliliter of normal salines. And monitor vitals and maintain urine output at 0.5 to 1 milliliter per kilogram per hour. If the patient is bleeding, we should give blood therapy. We say when we give a patient a moderate or large surgery, we should prepare some blood. For example, we should give a patient a type and the screen of blood, and should give cross-match of blood, and we should give blood storage. And usually nowadays we give blood components transfusion. Blood components usually derived from whole blood, and most common used nowadays. And many kinds of components can derived from whole blood. For example, FFP and packaged red blood cell, and so on. We can choose it according to different patients and different conditions. But when we give blood therapies, also can make some complications. For example, transfusion reactions, allergic reaction, or hemolytic sometimes, and also can cause metabolic abnormalities, for example, acidosis or accumulation of potassium, and sometimes citrate intoxication when you give so many blood transfusion, and sometimes maybe transmission of viral disease cause patient infections, right? And sometimes can cause hypothermia and coagulation disorder, and so on. Some patients usually maybe need a large volume of blood or fluid exchange, right? Because a large blood bleeding, and so we should pay attention to acid-base balance. And acid-base balance management, sometimes we should first recognize what kind of acidosis, and if patient had acidosis. Adverse effect of acidosis, we say usually if patient suffer from acidosis, sometimes maybe patient have increased serum potassium and the central nervous system depression, sometimes cardiovascular depression and vasodilation. So the blood pressure can decrease and can increase rate of cardiac arrhythmia or hypovolemia sometimes. So in these cases, we should give some drugs to correct the acidosis. And adverse effect of alkalosis is decreased. Is decreased the serum potassium and decreased serum potassium sometimes, and the central nervous system excitation, for example, and it can decrease cerebral blood flow and coronary artery vasoconstriction. It also should be corrected immediately. And also, maybe patient can suffer from respiratory acidosis or metabolic acidosis, right? And we can use blood gas analysis to diagnose the type of acidosis or alkalosis, right? If patients suffer from metabolic acidosis, we can use carbon dioxide to correct, right? And also we should correct the process of acidosis. And respiratory alkalosis usually because of the low ventilation, right? So if the patient has some manifestation of respiratory alkalosis, we should give some drugs, or the first step, I think, is not to give drugs. We should give a hyperventilation to correct the respiratory alkalosis of patients, and also correct the causes. And the metabolic alkalosis also need us to correct the causes. The blood gas management, during the whole stage of operation, we should give blood gas management, blood gas analysis to a patient, especially a large hernia surgery, or some patients weak or severe ill, yeah. And what does blood gas can tell us? It can tell us pH, how much, right? Oxygenation, normal or not. And the ventilation, about the PaCO2, high or not. And the content of the carbon dioxide, and also electrolyte, right? And hemoglobin, yeah. So we can according to the blood gas analysis, to diagnose if the patient exists the acidosis or not, and have low PO2 or not. If patient have low PO2, we should find some causes, right? What is the causes? Usually because low oxygen supply sometimes and hypoventilation, for example, low oxygen delivery, and right to left intrapulmonary shunts sometimes, for example, pneumonia and bronchial intubation sometimes, and the intracardiac shunts, right? Ventilation perfusion mismatch sometimes. So we should find the cause and correct the cause. And what does the and also if the PaCO2 low, sometimes maybe because of the hyperventilation or metabolic acidosis, respiratory or alkalosis, right? And if the PaCO2 high, usually the cause is the ventilation low. We see hypoventilation. So at this moment, we should correct the hypoventilation to be more vital, right? Vital volume sometimes, yeah. And during operation, another thing we should consider is positioning. And as we know, when we position the patient, sometimes will damage patients. Some if we haven't given a proper position or protection, maybe sometimes the patient injured, right? No, what kind of positions are in during surgical procedure? One is supine. This is the most common position, right? This position is minimal effect on circulation, and but we should padding all pressure points, right? And for example, knee, elbow, head, etc. And it also have some risk of aspiration. And another one is prone. This is where we see can press, BC, and need mechanical ventilation usually. If the patient is general anesthesia, it's in general anesthesia, right? And another one is head down. Head down position usually increase venous return, right? And push diaphragm up, sometimes increase intracranial pressure and upper body congestion. So in this kind of position, we should pay attention to the blood pressure and to cardiac function sometimes. And lateral decubitus position. We often use this one to thoracotomy, kidney surgery, and sometimes lung surgery, right? And the jackknife position, usually we give this position to a patient for back surgery. And another one is the lithotomy position. Is usually for the surgery, for urological surgery sometimes, and the leg in elevation, leg sometimes, yeah. And if we haven't put the proper position for a patient, maybe peripheral nervous injury, peripheral nervous injury happens, for example, ulnar nerves, right? Ulnar nerves injury usually we say most common postoperative nerve injury, and in the OR table against the posterior aspect of medial epicondyle of the humerus, right? And the manifestations is inability to abduct or oppose the fifth finger, and the diminished sensation over both services, medical one and one